Chicago, November. The wind sliced through the alleys between skyscrapers like blades. Neon lights cast a blue glow over rain-soaked sidewalks. An old man stood in front of the thick glass door of the Hearthstone Brew, his breath curling into mist and dissolving into the cold. A worn-out work jacket clung to his frame, dusty shoes, a knit beanie pulled low over his brow. He didn't look like a regular, at least not by today's standards. In his hand was a crumpled $20 bill. Inside, the atmosphere was oddly warm, but not the kind that made you feel safe. It was the warmth of a showroom where everything was designed to impress, not to live. Polished leather armchairs, gleaming marble counters, and customers wrapped in expensive trench coats with glowing MacBooks. The old man pushed open the door. Heat hit his face, mingled with the scent of espresso and baked apple pie. But instead of relief, he felt colder. A young man stood behind the counter clad in a flawless grey suit, a slim gold watch glinting at his wrist. Julian Croft. He was speaking gently to a female customer with a perfect smile, eyes scanning every corner of the room. And then he saw the old man. Julian's gaze paused for only a second, but in that moment it revealed everything: assessment, disdain, and a decision. He strode toward the counter. His voice was soft but sharp, cutting through the hum of the espresso machine like a blade. "Sir, I'm afraid we cater to a certain clientele. There's a shelter just a few blocks away." The old man didn't respond right away. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out the crumpled 20. His eyes locked onto Julian's deep and still like a frozen lake. "Just a black coffee. To go." Julian didn't touch the money. He looked at it, then back at the man. "We reserve the right to refuse service to anyone." His tone was calm and courteous, but there was nothing human in it. A security guard appeared, hand resting on his radio. Customers glanced over, then quickly looked away. No one said a word. No one objected. No one asked why. The old man stood there for a few more seconds. Then he nodded slightly, folded the bill, slipped it back into his pocket, and turned to leave. The door closed behind him with perfect soundproofing. Outside, the rain fell gently. Neon light from the Hearthstone Brew sign reflected in a nearby puddle, a trembling, smeared, misshapen glow. He stood there staring at it, not angry, not surprised, just a sorrow so familiar it needed no expression. He had once carved that sign with his own 2 hands. The night wind cut straight to the bone. Arthur pulled his cap lower as he stepped off the brightly lit sidewalk. His shoes scraped softly against the damp gravel road, but his mind had drifted lost in another time. Long ago, 30 years earlier, on a night just as cold as this one, Arthur, then a young man recently laid off from a steel mill, sat across from his father at a small diner tucked beneath an overpass. Dim yellow lights, flimsy plastic chairs, and in front of them a single donut split in half, resting on 2 paper plates. "We split it like always," his father smiled, voice raspy but gentle. His hands, cracked and calloused from decades of hauling steel through sleet and snow, set down a plastic cup of coffee on the table. An older man, the diner's owner, a Greek immigrant, passed by. He looked at them for a long moment, then without a word, placed 2 steaming cups of hot coffee in front of them. "On the house, son," the owner said, voice deep and warm. "Everyone needs a little warmth." Arthur never forgot that man's gaze, not pitying, not judging, just understanding. That sentence became his compass when success came. He didn't just want to open a coffee shop. He wanted to create a refuge, a firelight in the frozen city. The Hearthstone Brew was born from that memory. Arthur designed every detail himself, from the red brick fireplace in the corner to the simple but sturdy wooden chairs. He used the same hands that once hauled steel to build tables, paint doors, and carve the first sign by hand, a seat by the fire for every soul. On opening day, there were no celebrities, but he remembered each of the first guests, a firefighter, fresh off shift, a college student with a paint-smudged tote bag, an old teacher who'd just retired after 40 years. They weren't just customers, they were community. Arthur could still recall the feeling when the first fire crackled, when laughter echoed against warm wooden walls. It wasn't just a coffee shop, it was the beating heart of an American dream. That dream had gone cold. Arthur looked back through the window of the Hearthstone Brew. The fireplace still stood, but now it was just decor. No one sat around it. No one told stories. He felt a strange emptiness. No anger, no bitterness, just a quiet, aching question. When did this place stop breathing? The wind lashed again, pulling him back to the present. Arthur slowly turned away, hands tucked into his coat pockets, eyes still fixed on the shop. He hadn't come to reclaim anything. He had come to understand. He needed to know, how did the heart of his life's creation stop beating? The next morning, Arthur sat in the coffee shop across the street, a simple place with plastic chairs, watered-down coffee, no jazz music or fireplaces. But from his seat by the window, he could see every corner of the Hearthstone Brew. He sat there every day, no talking, no note-taking, just watching. Julian arrived at 8 a.m. sharp like a CEO running a multi-million-dollar company. He entered the cafe as if stepping onto a stage, eyes sweeping across every table like a director approving each scene. His voice was deep, polite, but every gesture suggested he was ready to erase anything that didn't fit the brand. Arthur saw him lean down to shake hands with a man stepping out of a Porsche. He personally delivered coffee to a group of influencers posing with their lattes. But when a mail carrier dropped by for a to-go order, gloves still on, rain soaking his back, Julian barely glanced his way before turning away. When an elderly woman lingered for over an hour without ordering more, a staff member was quietly sent to gently remind her. Arthur wrote nothing down. He only gripped his lukewarm coffee tightly. And then he saw her, Clara Mendoza, the only person in the cafe who didn't seem to be performing. Her dark hair was tied in a neat bun, a slightly worn apron, and her voice was soft yet warm. Arthur saw her bend to pick up a fallen book for a young boy offering a playful wink. He saw her discreetly hand yesterday's croissant to a tired-looking woman with a quiet, "Don't worry, it's on us." She wiped tables with bare hands and greeted regulars with a smile instead of words. She didn't care about cameras. She didn't hide her kindness. But Julian noticed, and he wasn't pleased. Arthur watched her being called into the office after the midday rush. Through the frosted glass, he couldn't hear a word, but he saw Julian's finger point sharply, saw Clara stand still, hands clenched tightly. When she stepped out, her lips were pressed together, her eyes blinking fast, as if holding something back. Another staff member whispered he chewed her out for giving away food again. Arthur heard that loud and clear. That afternoon, he circled around to the alley beside the cafe. The metal door leading to the control room was still there, and he still remembered the code. He stood before the control panel, the monitors displaying every angle of the cafe. His hands trembled slightly, but his eyes did not. Clara was the last flicker of warmth left, and Julian, he was snuffing it out bit by bit. Arthur no longer had the strength to swing a hammer, but he knew exactly how to dismantle a building if the rot started from within. He would start at the foundation. Inside the cramped control room, the glow from the security monitors lit up the deep lines on Arthur's face. The air still carried the scent of old sweat-hot wiring and a fine layer of dust over the circuit boards. It had once been the command center Arthur built with his own hands, now reduced to a surveillance chamber for those who judged the worth of others. He sat down and placed his fingers on the keyboard. The admin password hadn't been changed. Part of him felt relief. Another part, pain. Julian hadn't bothered erasing the past because to him, Arthur was no longer a threat. The screen loaded the main dashboard. Arthur opened the tab marked Internal Finance. The accounting system he'd once streamlined for transparency now looked like a labyrinth. Expenditures were buried under smooth-sounding labels, branding, consultancy, identity enhancement fees. But Arthur wasn't naive. After an hour of digging, he found what he feared Julian had been siphoning funds from the operations budget through fake contracts payments to companies that didn't exist. $1 million gone in the past 6 months. This wasn't just misuse, it was federal-level financial fraud. Arthur sat in silence. Then his eyes fell on another tab, Brand Purity Protocol. His breath slowed. He opened the file, and his world tilted. A blacklist, not of employees, but of customers. He read each line, smells like a factory. Too many tattoos. Student, low spender. Looks homeless. Seen twice. Ban if returns. Each entry included surveillance photos. There was a scoring system based on appearance, race, and attire. Doesn't fit brand image appeared over and over again. Arthur felt his stomach tighten. But it didn't stop there. At the bottom of the file, another list, internal risks. The first name, Clara Mendoza. Beside it, the note read, overly sentimental, seen giving food, possible liability, terminate within 30 days. Arthur froze. His hand remained on the mouse, unmoving. His eyes didn't blink, as if staring long enough might make it all disappear. Clara, the last spark in the fireplace he built, was marked for removal. Not because she was careless, not because she did anything wrong, but because she still had a heart. Arthur turned off the screen, his lips pressed into a hard line. The dream he and his father once built a place of warmth for all was being twisted into a machine that filtered out humanity. And if left unchecked, it would destroy the last of those who still knew how to love. He didn't yet know what he would do next, but he knew this Julian had crossed a line that could never be forgiven. 1 week after discovering the Brand Purity Protocol, Arthur returned to his usual seat across the street. But this time, he wasn't just an observer. He was a man preparing for an earthquake. Julian had no idea. He was too busy with calls, closed-door meetings, and flashy slide decks he called the New Vision. Arthur, meanwhile, quietly backed up every file, building a chain of undeniable evidence, fake invoices, human beings, graded like defective products. But it wasn't the spreadsheets that lit the fire inside him. It was what he saw outside the data. Clara, the girl with the gentle smile and listening eyes, was wearing down piece by piece. Arthur saw her doing everything. When the cafe was crowded, she ran tables. When the espresso machine jammed, she fixed it. When a lost child wandered in, Clara knelt down and said, "It's okay, sweetheart. Let's find your mom okay," and handed the kid a warm cup of water. Julian saw it too. The next morning, Arthur returned just in time to see a technician installing a new camera directly above the barista station. One lens pointed straight at Clara's usual spot. Company policy, Julian explained to the staff. Transparency builds excellence. The coldness in that line made Arthur want to smash the window. But he stayed silent. That afternoon, Arthur witnessed something he would never forget. Clara was called out by Julian in front of customers, in front of her peers. "I've warned you, Clara," Julian said, his voice calm like a lecture. "This is not a playground. We are not a charity. That child didn't purchase anything. Next time, remember, water costs money too. Clara said nothing. The other staff stood frozen, no one daring to meet her eyes. One employee started to pull out a phone, then quickly slipped it back away. She didn't cry. But Arthur saw her fingers gripping the cloth in her hand, her cheeks flushed with humiliation. Arthur didn't step in, not because he was afraid, but because he knew that moment was a living document, and Julian Croft had just lit the match beneath his own throne. That night, in the cramped room of a worn-down motel, Arthur opened his laptop. He began compiling the list of fake transaction screenshots from the cameras, the blacklist file, the proposal to rebrand the company under a new name, Hearthstone Elite. Julian planned to turn the fireplace into a champagne bar, to turn a refuge into a VIP lounge for the deserving. No, not while Arthur still had breath in his body. He looked at the wall in front of him. Taped, there was a black-and-white photo of his father, the man who once split their last donut in half and said, "Warmth isn't about heat, son. It's about dignity." Arthur nodded, whispering to himself like a promise. It's almost time. The Chicago night was strangely stifling. No rain, no wind, just a thick layer of air hanging heavy as if the city were holding its breath before a storm yet to arrive. Inside the Hearthstone Brew, everything seemed normal, or at least it looked that way. Julian stood at the counter, adjusting his cufflinks, while chatting with two customers dressed like they'd just stepped out of a fashion magazine. The rest of the staff moved like shadows, silent, mechanical, careful. Clara stood behind the espresso machine, her eyes tired. She no longer smiled the way she used to. The cup she placed was still neat, but the warmth was gone, as if kindness had been put on pause. And then her father walked in. A small man in his 70s, hair silver, dressed in a faded janitor's uniform. His hands still bore dried paint. He paused at the door, scanning the cafe, and his eyes lit up when they found his daughter. Clara rushed to him, whispered a few words in Spanish, and gently wrapped an arm around his shoulder. Julian saw it all. He had just turned to leave the counter when he stopped, a twisted flicker of amusement flashing in his eyes. He strode toward them, a smile polite but sharp as a blade. "Oh, Clara," he said loud enough for nearby customers to hear. "Just a reminder, please tell your family that English is preferred on the premises. We're an American brand, after all." Silence, cold, aching, and drawn out. Clara froze. Her eyes widened. Her father lowered his head. No reaction, no rebuttal, just bowed his head as if he were the one at fault. Arthur, from his corner of the cafe, shot to his feet. Anger didn't come like fire. It came like ice. A total freeze. His back straightened. Fists clenched. He was no longer the quiet observer, no longer the former founder, no longer the beggar Julian once threw out. He was Arthur Vance, the man who had built every brick, every beam of this place. What he witnessed wasn't just an insult. It was an invasion of dignity, of heritage, of the very soul he had fought to preserve within Hearthstone. He saw himself in Clara's eyes that burned cold and stung with silent pain. And he saw his own father, the man who once endured society's contempt, but still said, "Don't forget others might be colder than we are." Arthur left the cafe, not to walk away, but to prepare. That night, he didn't sleep. He organized his documents, printed every piece of evidence, built a presentation file, rehearsed his words in his mind one by one. No embellishment, no vengeance, only the truth. Tomorrow morning, Julian would host an important meeting with investors, and Arthur Vance would be there, not to beg for what was lost, but to demand justice. That morning, the Hearthstone Brew closed earlier than usual. Julian Croft stood in the center of the cafe, adjusting his tie like he was about to take the stage on Broadway. He had ordered the entire staff to remain for a video conference with the investment group Arcadia, the ones considering a 9-figure buyout of the cafe chain. On the large screen appeared 6 faces, stiff collars, headsets, on not a single smile. Julian launched into his pitch-waxing poetic about the brand journey, about turning Hearthstone into a luxury experience. And here he said, clicking his remote, is the proposed redesign, the fireplace replaced by a champagne bar, imported from Paris interiors, swapped for chrome and Italian leather, and customer screening to ensure exclusivity. The door opened. Arthur walked in, holding an old leather bag and a small USB drive. No one said a word. No introduction was needed. Everyone who'd worked at Hearthstone knew exactly who he was. Julian stiffened. He growled, "Security, sit down." Julian Arthur said, his voice not loud, but carrying the weight of steel, forged in fire. "You'll want to hear this." He walked straight to the projector and plugged in the USB. Slide 1. The list of fake expenses. Arcadia's representatives began scribbling notes. Slide 2. The brand purity protocol. A blacklist of customers. Notes like looks unemployed, smells of sweat, and speaks Spanish. No one in the room moved. Slide 3. The internal note, Clara Mendoza. Terminate within 30 days. And finally, a video. Footage from the night before. Julian approached Clara and her father. His words rang out clearly. "Remind your family that English is preferred on the premises." Silence. Absolute. Staff turned to look at Julian as if he were the last stain needing to be wiped from the cafe's memory. Julian stammered, That's out of context. It's brand policy." Arthur turned to face him, voice low and solid, like a hammer striking an anvil. "My father once told me, the worth of a man isn't in his wallet, it's in his hands and in his heart. You've got neither." Then he turned to Clara. "Clara Mendoza, you are the new Chief Executive Officer of the Hearthstone Brew, effective immediately." Clara's mouth dropped open. She shook her head in disbelief. One staff member began to clap, then another. And within seconds, the cafe erupted, a wave breaking after a storm held in too long. And then the door opened again. 2 Chicago police officers entered. "Julian Croft, you are under arrest for fraud and embezzlement. Please come with us." He was cuffed and escorted out in silence. No one saw him to the door. Arthur simply looked at Clara and gave her a quiet nod. His work was done. 3 months later, no more surveillance cameras in every corner. No more glossy menus or business casual dress codes. Now inside the Hearthstone Brew, there was only laughter echoing under the warm amber glow of wooden ceiling lights. The old sign, "A seat by the fire for every soul," had been polished and rehung above the fireplace. A child curled up at her mother's feet, warming her hands by the flames. An older man, with a worn-out backpack, sipped espresso beside a young lawyer still in a suit, chatting like old friends without a hint of hesitation. At the bar, Clara wore a simple shirt and a linen apron, writing out a receipt while listening to a customer talk about their first-ever job interview. She wasn't a CEO in the traditional sense, but everyone called her the Keeper of the Flame. Next to the bar was a small sign that read, "The Hearth Fund. Pay it forward a coffee today for someone who'll need it tomorrow. Kindness can be warmed up and served again." Arthur still visited the cafe often. He never interfered. He simply sat at his usual table by the window, reading the paper, sipping his black coffee, no cream, no sugar. Today was no different. The door opened, A college student stepped in, backpack heavy on his shoulders. He fished out a few coins, counting them carefully. But when he reached the counter, Clara had already placed a steaming cappuccino and an egg sandwich on the tray. From the hearth fund, she smiled. "Someone left this for you." The student looked up, eyes wide, voice shaky. "Are you—" "Sure, completely," Clara said. "Welcome home." Arthur watched from afar and paused his reading. His heart warmed, not from the coffee, but from the act itself. In that moment, he saw himself, 30 years ago, sitting beside his father in a dingy diner. And he knew the fire he once lit had found someone to keep it burning. Outside, snow began to fall gently. The cafe door opened softly, then closed again, holding the warmth in place. The Hearthstone Brew hadn't just survived. It had returned, and this time it belonged to everyone. If you believe in the power of kindness and want to hear more stories that warm the soul, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share Toch's story. Because small flames always deserve a place to burn bright, and we'll keep telling the stories that keep them alive.